People have always wondered what happens when we die. In this episode, we will be exploring 6 different ancient pagan traditions and their views of the afterlife. So, from the Egyptian Duat to the Celtic Otherworld, from the Norse realm of Valhalla to the Yoruban realm of the ancestors, each path offers us a glimpse into death, rebirth, and what it truly means for the soul to continue once it passes through this world. So, Merry Meet, I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin, and tonight we're here talking about ancient pagan views of the afterlife. So, Merry Meet, leave a heart or a thumbs up if you are joining us live or in replay. This helps us get it out to the feed of more people. And leave questions and comments in the chat, and there will be a Q&A at the end. I'll also be watching the chat as we go. So we have a lot to talk about tonight. We're going to dive in. We're going to be exploring 6 different traditions. Originally, I was going to explore 7, but I think we're going to run out of time. So just so you know, these are not the only views of the afterlife. These just happen to be the 6 that I chose to talk about tonight. As we approach Samhain season, this is a time when people start to wonder about what happens when we cross through the veils, what is just beyond this world. If you caught my episode last week, we were talking about ghosts and spirit encounters. So this whole month and into November, we're going to be talking about different topics that are very relevant to the Samhain season. Contemplating kind of our own views about life and death. We're just called to question and ask questions about what we believe. So tonight we're going to be talking about ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, the ancient Celts, the Norse, Mesopotamia, the Yoruban view of the ancestral realm as well. And originally I was going to talk about the Aztec views of life after death, but we're going to run out of time, and I think we'll add that as well as some others into a future episode. So we're going to start with ancient Egypt, and what I'm also welcome you to do as you join us here is to put in the chat which of these views do you know about. So if you know something about this view of the afterlife, we'd like to hear from you, and also be thinking about how do these different views of the afterlife resonate with your own views? What do you think happens after we die? So let us jump right in. And we're going to start with ancient Egypt. So in ancient Egypt, the afterworld or the afterlife, the underworld, is called Duat, spelled D-U-A-T. Now, this is a liminal realm that offers those who pass through the veils, offers them many challenges and gates to pass through. At each one, there might be a challenge or something for the soul to do in order to continue. At any point, the soul could kind of fall out of the pathway. But those who make it all the way to the end, it is said that this is the realm that is ruled by Osiris, a sun god, and also the god of death and resurrection. Now, Anubis, a different Egyptian god, is the one who actually guides the souls through these different challenges and these different gates. The realm is said to be divided into 12 different portions of it, one for each hour of the night. Now, at each gate, the soul would be tested in some way, either by guardians, by serpents, or by spirits. And eventually the traveler would make it to the Hall of Mot. And there, the heart would be weighed against the weight of a feather. So we talked about this a few episodes ago. We were talking about different deities that are connected to shadow work, some of the dark gods and goddesses. And we actually talked about Anubis at that point and his role in helping with this process. Now, here the heart is weighed against the weight of that feather. And if the heart is pure enough, which means that the heart is free of kind of deceit or lies, then Osiris would welcome the soul into Aru, A-A-R-U, which is the field of reeds. This is a peaceful, sunlit place, and there is talk about as one would kind of travel through the different gates and the different portions of the underworld, it would get lighter and lighter and lighter. So in the beginning, it's very, very dark, and as you would pass each of the challenges, it would get lighter and lighter until eventually you make it to Aru, which is sunlit and peaceful. And this is also a place where the soul would be reunited with those who had come before them. Now, if on the other hand, the heart is too heavy, that because there was either falsehood or there was deceit in the heart would then be devoured by Amit, Ammit, who is the serpent that ends the soul's journey. Now, if you kind of think about these two kind of contrasting ideas, having our heart be pure versus having the heart be full of falsehoods or lies or deceit, what it does is this idea of the underworld or the other world will keep the soul living in integrity. So essentially what it does is creates living people who are trying to live a good life. Trying to keep the soul light. And we can also think about that and how it encourages, think about our own views of the afterlife. What do we think happens after we die? But at least in a version of this, like this, it encourages us to live better lives while we are humans. So it's also kind of interesting to think about that we don't really have to wait until we die to reflect on topics like this. So maybe this isn't just about death. Like if we think about the Egyptian underworld, maybe it's not just about death. It's something that we could think about even while we are living. Every time that we choose to live in truth, we choose to live in integrity. We are choosing life, right? And every time that we choose to live in lies or in deceit, then we are getting a little bit closer to death. So would love to hear what you think, anybody. And also what I wanted to mention here is that we could do an entire episode on the Egyptian underworld alone. So we're only going to get a little glimpse of each one of these. So you can just see the different ancient pagan views of the afterlife. But if you know anything about the Egyptian afterlife, anything you would like to add to the conversation, we would love to hear from you. So just pausing for a moment to say hello to those who are joining us live. Mary Meet, to Kurt and Amy and Jamie. Mary Meet, Taliesin's here. Jason, Misty, Mary Meet, everybody. Definitely share in the chat with us. What do you think happens after we die? Or if you resonate with any of these different pagan views of the afterlife. Now, the other thing I'm going to drop in the chat now, this is a good time to drop it in, is there, I think this was, it might have been 2 years ago. I don't believe this was last Samhain, but 2 years ago, I did an episode. This is episode 66, and it's called Witches, Pagans, and the Afterlife. So I'm going to drop this in the chat, and for those who are watching back later on YouTube, this will be also in the comments below. So this episode is more about modern pagans' view. The episode I'm dropping in the chat, episode 66, what do modern pagans think about the afterlife, as opposed to tonight's episode where we're exploring kind of what do the ancient ancestors believe and what did they think happens after we die. Now what we are going to see is we start to look at the ancient Celts, which we're going to do in just a moment. We're going to see very many similarities between some of the views of modern pagans, which shouldn't be surprising to us. Modern pagans draw very heavily from the Celts, and so it's very interesting that our modern pagan views look very similar to the views of the ancient Celts. Segueing from ancient Egypt into ancient Greece, so let's talk about what did the ancient Greeks believe. Now, the ancient Greeks believed upon death, the soul would cross over the river Styx, and that in order for you to kind of make it through this process, you had to have some type of a proper burial, and you had to have a coin or coins with you that would help you pay the toll to cross over the river Styx. Now, there were considered three main realms of the underworld. There is of the afterlife. There is Elysium, which is the place where the true heroes and those who are blessed would immediately go there. So for your average person, you're not immediately going to go to Elysium. As far as your average person, there was a place called Asphodel, spelled Asphodel, the Asphodel Meadows, which was kind of like a neutral ground where the ordinary souls could go. In some versions, so like if you've read the Odyssey, for example, there's descriptions of like what the kind of afterlife is like, and it's sort of this gray, dark, dusky kind of place where people are sort of like shades of what they were when they were living. It's not super pleasant, and it's also not super scary. It just sort of exists, but it isn't like a heaven kind of beautiful place that the soul would go. In other versions of, because ancient Greece spans over multiple centuries, in other versions, Asphodel Meadows is just kind of this neutral place that you go. It's not necessarily as dark as it is in some versions, especially the version that we see in the Odyssey. Now, there is also a realm called Tartarus, which is like a deep abyss that a person would be sent to for punishment or for karmic correction of some kind. So if you were an ordinary soul, you could go to Asphodel Meadows, or you could go to Tartarus, depending on how you had lived your life while you were alive. Now, I think that's also what's important to discuss when we're talking about the ancient Greek perspectives of the afterlife is the Persephone myth. So just briefly, for those who don't know the myth, Persephone at the spring equinox was abducted by the god Hades, who is the god of the underworld, who saw her, thought she was beautiful, wanted her, and took her with him. Her mother, Persephone's mother, Demeter, at some point realizes that she's gone and wanders around looking for her. Eventually, in some stories, it's said that Hecate tells her that Hades has taken Persephone to the underworld. Demeter petitions Zeus to bring her daughter back home. At first, he says no, he can't do anything about it because Persephone has eaten pomegranate seeds while in the underworld. Demeter then says that she will withdraw all of her fertile energy from the earth. This goes on for a while. Eventually, Zeus decides that there has to be some kind of a compromise, and Persephone is allowed to return to the earth half the year. So I'm sorry, I said she was abducted. Basically, she is abducted at fall equinox, I should say, and then she descends. And then she will come back at the spring equinox. So she's allowed to return for half the year, which is when Demeter brings back her fertile energy to the earth. Now, why I'm bringing up the story here is to highlight this idea that the Greeks had of this sort of death and rebirth, right, that could happen, or this death and this resurrection, which we also see across many ancient pagan cultures. Now, there is evidence also that the ancient Greeks believed in a transmigration of souls. So, especially if we look at the Eleusinian mysteries, there is this idea that part of what people would do during the Eleusinian mysteries, or part of the mystery that they would receive while they were going through all of it, was that the soul doesn't die. And people would leave the Eleusinian mysteries, those who went through the Eleusinian mysteries would leave feeling very changed and very calm and very, like, basically fearless. They had lost their fear of death. This has led us to speculate that there was something within it, and also knowing that the Eleusinian mysteries kind of had a formal enactment of Persephone's abduction and then return to the earth. So this idea that the ancient Greeks believed in reincarnation of some kind. And in fact, we know the followers of Pythagoras thought that there was a transmigration of the soul. So that's why I wanted to talk and kind of highlight the story of Persephone here, because we see evidence that there was this belief in reincarnation. So now the question is, how does the reincarnation work? If you end up in like the Asphodel fields, is it a place where a person goes for a time and then they are eventually reincarnated? Do you ever go there, and just does the transmigration of souls ever stop in the Greek idea of the afterlife? So these are all questions that we're not going to answer tonight, but I just wanted to kind of highlight the different, I guess I should say, the main points of each of these views on the afterlife. So again, let us know, what are your views? What do you resonate with? We're about to move into the Celts, and you're going to see some similarities of the Greeks, as well as this idea that there is a place that we can go after death, but there also is reincarnation, as opposed to like a Christian view of death where heaven or hell, or wherever you end up, right, is sort of like a one-way stop. You just kind of end there, and then that's where you remain. So I'm just going to return to the chat here. Um, so Kurt said the Land of the Kings, and he's watched many episodes on it. Is that a documentary on Egyptian afterlife? I'm not familiar with it, so just put in the chat. And Merry Meet also to Rebecca, who is joining us. Merry Meet, everyone. Okay, so let us move into ideas about the Celtic Otherworld. And so this is the one I mentioned earlier. So you're going to see a lot of similarities here between what ancient pagan, I should say, what many modern pagan traditions believe and what the Celts believed. So the Celts believed in a place called the Otherworld. The Otherworld is a realm of eternal youth, joy, and wisdom that a person could travel to. So it's not really about punishment or reward. It is simply like a continuation of life. When you die, you go to this other place, to the other world. Now, like I mentioned, this is probably where our modern pagan ideas of the Summerlands come from. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the Summerlands, I would recommend checking out episode 66, where I go into greater detail on that. In the ancient the ancient Celtic version of the other world is a multiverse, meaning that it exists parallel to this one. And there are many different spots where a person could cross through the veils into the other world. Now, some of those places would be places where there was a lot of mist, places where there were caves. You could kind of descend down into it. Those were thought to be places where the veils were kind of thin. Ancient mounds, which were often connected to the Sidhe or the fairy folk. Any one of these places could be a place where a person could travel and cross through these veils into the other world, which is essentially like a world that's just layered on top of our own. Now, in the Welsh tradition, the the version of the place, the other world, is called Annwn, Annwn. It was thought to be a place of beauty and abundance, so kind of like this world but better. In Irish lore, the other world is called Tirnanog, which translates to the land of youth. This is a place where the Tuatha De Danann, or the children of Danann, the gods, lived. Now there would be no sickness, no death, no dying. People would be kind of returned to their youth, to their best part of their lives. The veils it is said, the veils are thin between the start of winter and an ancient Celtic, like in the ancient Celtic calendar, the start of winter would be at Samhain, and the veils would be thin from Samhain until the beginning of summer, which in the ancient Celtic calendar would be Beltane. In this space from Samhain to Beltane, this would be a place when we could travel through the veils a little bit easier. So you could see how there's a lot of similarities to what modern pagans believe in some of what I'm saying here, right? It's said that the souls are also thought to reincarnate, oftentimes within their own same lineage, within the same family line, over and over and over again. And that the other world would be a place that the souls would go to rest and find renewal in between these reincarnations. So again, kind of thinking about modern pagan views of what happens when we die. Many of our modern pagan traditions suggest similar things, that there is reincarnation. We kind of reincarnate, not always within the same family line. Like, for example, I don't think that we reincarnate all the time in the same family line. I have memories of lives that are not within this line of my family. And I also know from talking to others and just reading stories about other people talking about past lives. It's not always in the same family line. But in our modern pagan views, we often talk about this reincarnation, but also this space called the Summerlands. And so, how these two kind of versions of the afterlife meet together in modern pagans is that we go to the Summerlands when we die, and we spend some time there resting and being renewed, and maybe kind of assimilating and learning and bringing together everything that we learned in this life, kind of seeing which lessons were achieved versus which lessons are still yet to be learned. And then at some point the soul chooses that it's time to migrate, and they will then be incarnated into a new body at that time. When that life is over, rest in the Summerlands in between that and the next life. So personally, in my own personal kind of ideas of the afterlife, I think mine are very close to what the ancient Celts believed. It resonates very much with me. Like I said, I have memories of past lives, so I believe in reincarnation, but I also do, having studied paganism since I was in my late teens, I also very much resonate with this idea of the Summerlands as well, this place that we would go in between incarnations where we kind of rest, we're renewed. This would also be a way that our kind of deceased who are newly deceased or deceased within the last like century or so would still be able to have contact with those of us on this side of the veils, right, before they kind of travel on and find their next incarnation. So just returning to the chat, to pause and so Jamie said, it's very interesting to me how many religions depicted a serpent as the bad guy, right, when it comes to the soul of humans. Plus, there is an extensive belief in a perfect afterlife versus a realm of punishment. She said, it's fascinating. I do believe there is at least some truth in there. And I think Jamie brings up a very good point, and it's something that I was actually I had the very good fortune of being at a class with Christopher Penzak last Thursday in Bellingham, Massachusetts. And one of the things that he talked about, his class was on the mighty dead. And one of the things he talked about is when you see threads throughout different cultures, and there seems to be things that are very similar from culture to culture to culture, from belief system to belief system to belief system, that is a good indication that there's some truth in what's being said. You know, so it's always food for thought, right? And everybody will kind of decide what they believe for themselves through, study, through just like introspection, through learning from mentors and elders and things like that, from reading. But there often is this idea like there's at least some truth in there when we see these connections from culture to culture to culture. So I agree with Jamie. Though we should also note, right, the serpent being the bad guy. In some of these stories, like this is pre-existent to the story of the serpent being the bad guy in the Christian stories, right, as well. The fall of man and woman from the Garden of Eden, the snake being the one who is the one who tempted Eve to eat the apple and then to receive the knowledge, right, of good and evil. And so, as the serpent is very much connected to the divine feminine, there is some theories that suggest that the serpent being kind of the bad guy in some of these stories is a way of the patriarchy to kind of disavow or try to negate some of those ancient matriarchal lines and stories, of the divine feminine. Saying Mary Meat saying hi to Joanne and Tom as well. So Tom says, "Nice, this is so fascinating." Yeah, I thought it would be a good topic for us to talk about closer to Samhain like this. Jamie also said, funny fact, she said reincarnation used to be a part of the Christian beliefs as well, and that is very true as well. That actually would be an interesting episode to do at some point, because many Christians don't realize that reincarnation was in fact a part of their own their own belief system at one point, and it lost favor. It fell out of favor at some juncture. Now, what I've always thought about this, so this is like I'm a little off on a tangent at the moment, and so we will get back to the Norse, which is our next group we're going to be talking about. We'll get back to them in just a moment, but kind of playing off of what Jamie had said here. So I read a lot of Edgar Casey when I was a teenager. So this is prior to me sort of finding the pagan path. Edgar Casey was a really good gateway for me because he was a Christian writer, but he also talked very much about things like this, reincarnation. So he said that there is reincarnation. He said it's he goes through and talks about like it's a fool who doesn't believe in reincarnation even though he himself was Christian. So I think that's very interesting. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that, if you think about like what is religion, sometimes when religion is used in bad ways, right? It's used to control people. So you think about like a view, like a Christian view, which tells you that you have to be a good person in this life. And if you don't find favor with God, you will go to hell, right? And you have no alternative. It's just like you go to hell and there's no way out of it. It's not like in some of these other stories where like you can move through different layers and face different challenges and eventually purify your soul and maybe get to heaven. It's sort of like you go to hell and you're in hell forever, right? So if you wanted to control large amounts of people, if they believe that they have multiple lives, well, if they mess up in this one, well, they'll just be able to get it right in a later one, right? So you have a kind of less control over groups of people when that's what they believe. But if instead they believe that they can be punished eternally, you can have a lot more control over them. So this is just food for thought. This is just me musing and kind of on a tangent here. But I've often wondered if that is the removal of reincarnation from a religion that wants to control people, if that has something to do with it. Because then you can say, well, these are the things you have to do in this life to get to the good place. And this is a really easy way to control people that way. So just some food for thought. Let's see. Let me going back to the chat here a bit. So Misty said, I don't know how these views would be seen by others, but she said, but to me, when you die, your loved ones are with you to guide you into the Summerland. So yeah, very modern pagan view. Once there, you can decide whether you want to stay or if you need to be reincarnated into life all over again, whether on this planet or others. If the soul still needs to learn vital lessons to help the spirit in journeys and to help the soul progress, then they would be reincarnated. Yeah, I mean, that seems very much very aligned with a lot of modern pagan views. So the Summerland would be a place where you would go, you would rest, you would decide, you would kind of integrate your lessons and then decide if it was time, when and if it was time to move on. Taliesin said, I agree too. He said, I think, though, for the soul to have a variety of perspectives and lessons, animals, other worlds, even different times can be visited to learn lessons. Yes. And so like Misty had mentioned too, perhaps there can even be reincarnation onto other planets. These could simply be other dimensions, right? Tom said he likes the Summerlands. Jamie said, I would love to sit and talk about Christian views on control. Yes, that is a whole other episode, right? Which we could definitely do at some point. Amy said there was a TikTok reel that said a guy has an Adam's apple. Maybe it wasn't the woman that ate the apple. Something to think about. Yes, definitely, right? All right, so yeah, keep it coming in the chat. We love to hear, like, what I love about these episodes is us talking about this. And if you are watching back in replay, we'd love to hear from you as well. I always go back into the comments later afterwards, and I answer or comment on anything that people put later that we didn't get a chance to do when we were live. So let's move into the Norse views of the afterlife. So Valhalla is the name of Odin's hall for warriors who die bravely. So they would be rewarded with an eternal feast until the days of Ragnarok, which are like the Norse apocalypse. Now, this is where you would go if you were a warrior. So the majority of people would not find their way till Valhalla and would instead go to the realm called Hell. Now, this is not Hell, the same hell as the Christians. This is Hell, Hel. This is the realm of the goddess Hel, who is a goddess of death, right, and of eternal life. This is a realm where the general dead would go, and it would be different for each person. And it is said that you got in hell what you made in life. So basically, your afterlife is the result of whatever you did here. So again, it would hopefully it's not so much about being scared into obeying like as far as like control goes. It's more like we want to live a good life now because we want the afterlife to also be good. And if we live a bad life now, then the afterlife will be a bad life. Now, there is also a place called Niflheim or Niflheim, which I really cannot pronounce all these. I'm trying my best on some of these. But this is said that this could be, on one perspective, this could be a place where thieves, murderers, or the dishonored dead go. It's not necessarily a place of punishment. It's a place of kind of like stillness or nothingness. So it's not like the Christian view of hell. It's just a place where you would go that isn't really great. So again, kind of coming back to that idea of like your afterlife, you make of your afterlife, what you make of your life, at least in the Norse perspective. Now, to the Norse, something that was especially important was memory and reputation, which were both very sacred. So to the Norse, you would basically be eternalized after death if you were remembered. And so it would be important for you to be remembered the way that you lived. So again, this would be incentive to live well because you want to be remembered well, and you live into eternity when people remember you, when they honor you, and things like that. So that would be the view of the Norse. And so anybody who let us know if you resonate with that, or if you know anything about the Norse afterlife. But generally, Valhalla, sometimes people don't realize this, but Valhalla isn't where most of the dead would go. It would be where the honored warriors would go. Now, I am going to switch over to Mesopotamia now, ancient Mesopotamia. Now, this is, of all of the groups that we're talking about right now, this would be the oldest of all, and we know the least about this, so a lot of it can be kind of speculation from piecing together ancient writings. Now, we know, according to the Epic of Gilgamesh, that all souls go to a dark and dusty underworld that is ruled by Ereshkigal. So, again, referencing an episode where we talked about the dark gods and goddesses. In one, we talked about Inanna and Ereshkigal. So, Inanna is the queen of heaven in Mesopotamia, and Ereshkigal is her sister. So, there's many, many layers to this story. So, like in at the very surface level, Ereshkigal, she rules over the underworld, and Inanna rules over heaven. And in the story of Inanna's descent, she descends from heaven to earth, and then she descends from earth into the underworld in order to attend her brother Utu's funeral. Now, as she descends down into the underworld, she passes through 7 gates. And so the Epic of Gilgamesh also suggests that the regular dead also would pass through these 7 different gates. And these 7 gates are like 7, basically open up the way into 7 different realms, which are guarded by different guardians. Now, at each of these gates, a person would have to leave like some kind of an offering. So we see in the story of Inanna, she strips herself bare of different things that she's wearing. So she'll take off a necklace that is at her throat. She takes off her top at one point, and basically she has to enter the underworld completely naked. Really, too, there are like a layer of this is that each of these 7 gates represent the 7 different chakras, or 7 different aspects of ourselves. Because remember, the chakra system is coming from India, and these stories are coming from Mesopotamia, so these are not quite coming from the same place. But there is this idea that there are these 7 different realms that they travel through, and different challenges as the dead pass through each of these different realms. Now, in the Mesopotamian stories as well, it is believed that the living sustain the dead. So if you kind of think back to like what we mentioned with the Norse, it was important that you lived on in people's memories. That's how you were eternalized. So here, the ancient Mesopotamians also believed that it was important for the living to sustain the dead, and that without the living sustaining the dead through offerings, the dead would be weakened, or the souls of the dead would be weakened. It really, because, like I mentioned, of all of the stories and all of the paths that we're talking about tonight, this is the most ancient of all. It's really a reflection of humanity's kind of first grappling with the impermanence of life. You know, what happens after we die? Is there anything left? Does something go on? And it also this is also highlights the importance of memory and keeping the dead alive through offerings and through rituals and different things like that. So for those who are in Shadow Seekers, we are actually going to be doing a ritual tomorrow night for where we are going to be reflecting on Anana's journey to the underworld and what happens as she and us pass through those 7 gates and what we can reflect on, what we can learn from the passage. So remember, all of these stories too, we are taught these stories as we are living, and they have many different layers to them. So like at only one layer is this about what happens when we die. At other layers, this is about what happens while we live, right? How do we live in a way that our afterlife will be a good one? So like kind of thinking about Anana's story, we can think about as we descend into our own underworld, what trials, what tribulations, what things do we face that can help sort of purify our souls and help us evolve and help us learn. And so we can reflect on this at many, many different layers. What happens after we die only being one of them. And then I wanted to talk about the Yoruban ideas of the afterlife. So I've begun studying Yoruban spirituality a lot recently because I've started connecting to Yamaya and to Ilegba and to Oshun. And so I wanted to talk about the reflections of, or I should say, the connections of the Yorubans to what happens after we die as well. So here, the theme is about ancestral community and spiritual reciprocity, and how when one dies, at some point they join the realm of the ancestors. So in the Yoruban ideas of death, there are these like two interwoven realms. There is the realm of Aye, which is the realm of the living, and there is the realm of Orun, Orun, which is the spiritual world. So this would be the realm of the dead and the ancestors and everything beyond this world. Now in Orun Rear, this is the realm of the virtuous, where the ancestors will guide the living. And so this is a place where where one could connect to in order to receive guidance from their ancestors and from those who came before them. So there's a lot of offering, leaving offerings not only for the deities but also for the ancestors, knowing that these are like the guides. These are the spirit guides that will help the living kind of tackle the difficulties of this world and help to prepare us for what comes beyond after death. Now, the ancestors are called Igungun, Egungun. They remain active in that realm, and there they are able to bless and protect and to influence their descendants. And so there is also an idea of reincarnation in the Yoruban communities. Death is seen as a return to community. And so, like, I see a lot of parallels here to the Celts, actually, even though these are two groups that developed very far from one another and didn't have many connections. But there is this idea that one can reincarnate as many times as they need to in order to fulfill certain lessons or reasons for why they, are here, whatever soul lessons that the person needs, and that eventually when it's time to sort of leave that cycle of death and rebirth, they then would join the realm of the ancestors and become an ancestor themselves. So it would be the idea like the ancestors have left that sort of cycle of being reincarnated, and now they've become guides. Now, within the Yoruban ideas of life and death, there is you will return over and over and over into this world until your work is done, and you will continue to incarnate over and over and over into your lineage. So again, there's this really important highlighting of the ancestral realm because you are always kind of reincarnating within that lineage. Now, the way that the living continue to connect to the dead is through offerings. So, like I said, leaving offerings, or calling out the names of the dead too, and the names of the ancestors is another way to stay connected to them. But I wanted to offer that because it is it's a pathway that not everybody is familiar with. So a lot of times we know more about ancient Egypt and ancient Greece because these are the stories that we kind of grow up with in school, and maybe we're not taught all the different cultures and what their views on the afterlife are. So I always think it's so interesting to kind of look at the cross section of the different viewpoints that our ancient ancestors had, and like we were mentioning earlier, finding the spaces where there are similarities, and those will often highlight the places where you might find more truth. So again, kind of considering, what do you think about the afterlife? Do you resonate with any of the versions that I talked about tonight? Or perhaps you resonate with pieces of some and you have your kind of your own vision of what the afterlife is all about. But what I would encourage you to just reflect on is, what is your vision of the afterlife and what vision of the afterlife speaks most to you. So you can go ahead and leave it in the chat, kind of think about it. You can think about it and come back later and leave it in the chat, or leave it here while you're live, or if you're back in replay. And we are going to move on from that into the Q&A now, but I'm just going to go and check the chat here. So I don't see anything more in the chat. So I don't know if sometimes I can't see the chat. So if there is anything there, Andrea said, I like that pathway of reincarnation. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the one that, I feel like I'm probably most resonate with the Celtic version, but I also, as I've started to study some of the Yoruban spirituality, I was very intrigued to see that it is very similar to the Celtic ideas of life and death as well, which again, kind of to me, leads me back to like a seed of truth somewhere in that. Okay, so let's open it up for the Q&A. So as always, the Q&A can be about anything. It doesn't have to be about pagan versions of the ancient pagan versions of the afterlife, but certainly can be. So you can comment on that. You can leave questions about that. Any questions you have about any of the ones we talked about tonight. But anything, it's fair game. Anything related to witchcraft, shadow work, or energy work, you can put in the chat for the Q&A. And I do have a question from last week that I missed. I was on vacation when I was doing the episode, and I missed this question that was left for me. This one is from Angela. And Angela said, what is the best way to intertwine a scientific mind with a spiritual one? So I think this is a really good question. It's one that I like talking about. Many of you know I'm a science teacher and a math teacher myself. But also a high priestess. And so it's a fine balance that we find between kind of the logical scientific mind and the mind that is required for us to be spiritual. So how do we find a balance between the two? So these are just going to be my thoughts, but I actually encourage anybody in the chat also, let us know what you think about that. How do you balance, this kind of a scientific mind with a more spiritual mind, and can they be balanced? I believe they can be. I think that one of the things that's important when we are trying to balance the two is to understand that it is not black or white. It's not either or. So sometimes people from the scientific communities will just disregard spiritual things because they say they can't be proven through scientific method, or they can't be proven through experiments. And it's as a scientist myself, I can understand where that perspective is coming from. But to me, it's like apples and oranges. It's like I told this story a while back, I think, about my acupuncturist who he said, why do we not see a lot of scientific studies on Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine? And it's because it's not really of interest. Like in traditional Chinese medicine, it's like we know this stuff works because we know this stuff works. We don't need science to prove it. So like to them, it's like, why bother wasting time and resources in trying to prove something that we just know to be true? And so sometimes that's kind of the leap of faith that I think that we have to make as witches, as pagans, and also witches and pagans who also have that scientific mind, is to kind of understand that science isn't going to be able to prove everything, and that doesn't mean that those things don't exist. On another layer of this, I firmly believe that science actually can prove a lot of this stuff. It just hasn't progressed far enough to be able to. So a lot of what we take for granted that we understand to be true, like our intuition, um, you know, views that we have about the afterlife, like the things we're talking about today, like the way that we connect to gods and spirits and things beyond us. I think that those are things that can probably be proven through science, probably as we increase our understanding of quantum physics. That's probably where a lot of this is going to lead eventually. Right now, though, science hasn't caught up and evolved deeply enough to be able to explain a lot of this stuff. So I think as witches who are trying to balance a scientific mind with a spiritual mind, we have to be okay with what's the word I'm going to say? I guess we have to be okay with not having it all neatly be explained by one theory, I guess. And sort of be okay with things that are contrasting, things that seem to conflict with one another. Like, so we might say, like, well, logic tells us, this, and this is the way to prove something, and therefore we can't really prove the existence of God, or we can't prove the existence of the spirits, or we can't prove the existence of our own intuition. But do we need to? I guess is a rhetorical question to ask everybody. I think, too, that there can be dangers in the way that the world has evolved into needing to prove everything scientifically. I think that that has greatly led to many in the spiritual communities like ours second guessing and doubting ourselves. So a lot of people who, one of the number one questions that I get asked about, or one of the number one problems people talk about in our communities, is self-doubt. People are always questioning themselves whether this is real, whether I'm an imposter, whether I really just did magic, whether my spells work, whether any of this stuff works, whether I'm really communicating with the gods. And so we're constantly questioning all that because the world itself, the collective, has moved to a space where it values logic over intuition, right? And so where does the balance come? I think the balance comes is from seeing that both are valid paths. And science and the scientific mind and the logical mind leads one direction, and it is a pathway that is important when we're studying science. It's not really the pathway that works when we're studying spirituality. And just being okay with that contrast and being okay with that conflict and letting there be kind of two things that are true at the same time, I think that can be the biggest challenge for us as witches and modern magical practitioners. But ultimately, I think that is the way to find balance, is being okay with those two contrasting views. Now, there is a book that I was going to recommend. And now I didn't grab it earlier, but it's called The Science of the Craft. And I've recommended this book before. Let me just look it up so I can get the author. If anybody knows this book, because I know I've recommended this before. So, okay, here I found it. So the book is by William Keith, Keith. The book is called The Science of the Craft. And I highly recommend this book, but here's the problem with it is that it is out of print, so it can be hard to find, and there are copies of it that are like $80 to $100, and I bought it for 15 bucks, probably 20 some years ago. But if you can find a copy of that either on Kindle or something, or you can find a PDF of it, or if you can find a used version of that book that is affordable, I highly recommend that book for anybody who's interested in science. William Keith does a great job at kind of explaining a lot of what I just talked about, and how how basically science proves way more of this stuff than most people understand. So I highly recommend that book. And I hope that that kind of helps with answering the question for Angela and anybody else who might be wondering about it. Anybody else who's got thoughts on it, definitely leave it in the chat for us. So I'm not seeing any more comments. I don't know if that means there are none, or Facebook's just not showing them to me right now. Let me refresh this and see. Yep, here are way more comments. Okay, thank goodness I can see this. Okay, so let me go back here. Taliesin said, love the similarity between those two different paths. Andrea said, I believe you are reincarnated in the same lineage until your purpose is done in that lineage. That's a great way to look at it. Kurt said, I see the afterlife as a meeting of the minds that can share with each other. That makes contact with that realm far more interesting than just death and just having like nothing be there. Yeah, being able to contact and be in connection with others. Chelsea said she liked Angela's question. Yeah, it's a very, very good question. I think one that a lot of people wonder about. Joanne said, I believe after death you stay around your loved ones, but you have the option to cross the veils and reincarnate. So again, so like kind of those two different paths, like staying in one space for some time and then choosing to reincarnate in another. Jamie said it would take me forever to explain the connection I have found between science and spirituality, but the short answer is that science continues to prove spiritual ideas. It's actually awesome. Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I think it continues to be able to prove spirituality, and as time goes by, it will prove it more and more and more. And so some of these things that are just simply discounted by people, they're like, oh, science can't prove that, or that's just in somebody's head. It's such like a, to me, it's such a easy out for people to take. You know, Instead, what I believe is it's just science hasn't evolved far enough to explain it all yet. Tom said he needs to look up last week's episode because he wants to know about the ghosts. Yeah, it was a good episode. I had a guest on, and we were talking about some of our own experiences with ghosts and spirits, and so definitely check that out. That was episode 158. Tell you what, let's put it in the chat for anybody who missed it. You can go ahead and watch it here. Let me put it in the chat right now for you. And then anybody back on YouTube later, it will be in the comments below. Okay. Tom said, odd question. If Earth really has a second moon for a few decades, what does that affect astrologically, or does it change lunar energy while it's here? I don't think I know enough about that to be able to speak on it. But if anybody does know more about it, Tom would be a great question to answer for him. I don't think I can speak on that one though. Jamie put the name of the book in the chat for you guys, William Keith, The Science of the Craft. So again, you'll find versions of it very expensive because it's out of print, but if you can find a used copy of it that's reasonable, or like a PDF or a Kindle version, I would look for it. Really, really, really great book. I highly recommend. Amy says she does not want to reincarnate around any of the people that she's around now. Yeah. Certainly, if we don't have a lot of connection to those in our lives at the moment, it's difficult to like conceive of a future life where we would have to be around those same people. So who knows? I can tell you right now that I have memories of lives that are not in this same family lineage, but I also have memories of lives that are in this one. So I think that both can be true. Um, and Chelsea said, I have comments regarding Angela's question, but the comments won't load on my laptop, and typing out the sentence on my phone took me like 5 minutes. Oh, that sucks. You can always come back in if in and type them in later if you want. So if there are any more questions or comments, put them in the chat. I'm going to kind of move on now and talk about what is coming up. So next week on 10/28, we're going to have the episode on Samhain. This is the Witch's Guide to Samhain. So that will be right at the start of Samhain season, and we'll talk about some of the lore of Samhain. We'll talk about different ways to celebrate Samhain, kind of remembering that Samhain is not just a day, but an entire season, and you have plenty of time to celebrate. So we'll talk about all the different ways that you can. And then on 11/4, the following week, we're going to be talking about warding and protection magic. So that was something that came up in last week's episode about ghosts and spirits. So we were talking about how like not every ghost or spirit that you might encounter is necessarily good. And sometimes people think that just because it's in the spiritual realm, it must be good. But just like there are bad people on this side that you wouldn't necessarily want to hang out with, there are spirits on the other side that you wouldn't necessarily want to hang out with either. And so whether you are looking for warding and protection from, kind of spirits, or from those people who live here, or energies who are here in this plane, this will be a good episode that will teach you some strategies to help protect yourself as the veils are thin and beyond that as well. So those are the next two episodes coming up. Also, our Demystifying Witchcraft course will be coming soon, maybe by the end of this month, if I'm able to pull that all together, but at least by November. And so for those who don't know, Demystifying Witchcraft is my signature course on witchcraft. It teaches you all of the different basics and fundamentals of witchcraft, from casting a circle to calling quarters to working with deities, spell work, sabbats, esbats, lunar timing, different things like that. So if you are looking to kind of brush up on the foundations of witchcraft, maybe you've never had any formal training or you want to brush up on it, the course could be great for you. It's also great for brand new beginners who are looking for kind of like a one-stop shop, where they can, or one-stop kind of place where they can learn everything at that basic level. And then as an added bonus, that course also allows people to have the opportunity to initiate into our online coven, the online version of our coven of Midnight's Flame. So watch for that coming. Like I said, that should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. And so that's all that I have for you tonight. But if you like what you hear, leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the feed, and that will help us get this out to more people. And you can also continue to leave comments in when you're back in replay. I always go back later, and I will answer anything that I didn't answer while we were live. I'm also going to put in the chat a link to the Witch's Guide to Shadow Work. So if you are not already on our mailing list, you can sign up here, and you will receive you'll receive a weekly email with these replays, as well as invitations to future rituals and classes and different things that we're doing. And also, when that Demystifying Witchcraft course is available, you'll receive information on that. And then the added bonus, you'll also receive a copy of the Witch's Guide to Shadow Work. Make sure to subscribe to Body Mind Witchcraft YouTube channel, and that way you will never miss a future episode as well. So as always, so wonderful to spend Tuesday evening with you. And I hope you have a great rest of your night. And until next time, blessed be.